I've got like a theory that like A players are way more productive at home and then B players are way less productive at home.
I agree. I think being an entrepreneur, you have to have a certain mentality and you don't have to be born with it. You can develop it over time.
There's a moment where every founder has to decide whether they're going to bootstrap or raise capital. Pretty much in medtech, it's like, you're going to have to raise capital. It's just kind of a matter of when.
Surgeons want something that's easy, effective, efficient. Patients want the best outcomes, and the hospital centers are worried about cost.
Thinking about all the stakeholders and really understanding what is going to drive value for patients and surgeons.
It's an easy trap for a founder to just say, well, I'm so excited about my product and the whole world is going to feel the same way I feel, and just get it out there.
People forget. I think nurse innovators, I didn't realize this when I was starting.
If you're a surgeon, you have to know what you don't know. And
competitive valuation is really key, especially when the sector is not having its best moment. You know what I mean? And I think too, hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Medtech Innovation Podcast. I'm your host, Spencer Jones, founder at XO Medtech. We have an absolute gem of an episode this week. I was joined by Dr. Oke Anakwenze.
Most of my patients call me Dr. A for short.
He's a shoulder surgeon that got fed up with clunky rotator cuff repair and decided to fix it himself. He's the founder at SutureTech, creator of RapidFix, and it's a device that fundamentally improves the way tendon repair is performed by surgeons. And it's actually sitting at the FDA's doorstep right now. They've submitted to the FDA. So he's also professor of orthopedics and chief of shoulder surgery at Duke University, which is crazy. In this episode, he shares crazy valuable insights on innovating as a surgeon and balancing that time, working with investors as a surgeon innovator, finding and working with the right development partners, and how he approached pricing as well as capital strategy for SutureTech. This conversation is pure gold for anyone building in medtech, especially clinical or surgeon innovators, and I know you're gonna love it. So without further ado, let's dive in. Dr. Oke Anakwenze, where do we find you today?
Good morning, Spencer. I am in my home office in Durham, North Carolina, where I get most of my work done. So this is my quote unquote headquarters for most of my work activities. Glad to be here.
I love it. Yeah, I work from home also, as probably anybody that's seen this pod knows. And like, I've got like a theory that like A players are way more productive at home and then B players are way less productive at home. You know what I mean? Because like, I'm pretty adamant about that though. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
I agree. I think, at least for me, I know that there is always a tendency to get distracted. So working from home, at least for me, I have to work by schedule. It's not a very, very rigid schedule, but it's sort of like, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. I plan on doing certain activities, specific breaks. For example, at 10 a.m., take a quick break. I switch what I'm doing until 12. Let me get a workout in at 12, go for a walk, come back. So it works well if you're disciplined and do things like turning off your phone or what have you. But, if not, you're just going to waste your time. But the best players are self-motivated and don't need someone to tell them what to do and when. They know what needs to get done and schedule.
That's so true. And bias to action is like one of my big things with like any profession, but especially entrepreneurship. You like have to have a bias to action and be self-motivated, like you said. So let's just go ahead and hop into it. I'm always curious. I'm a nurse by trade. I don't consider that going into medicine, right? That's going into patient care, if you will. But like for you being an orthopedic surgeon, your focus on shoulder, like I'm always curious how people got into medicine. You hear a lot of like, well, my dad and his dad, forefathers were surgeons or doctors. What got you into medicine? What made you take the dive, and how'd you pick shoulders as your focus?
Yeah, well, it's a long story, and I'd probably just summarize it. I think, my parents are Nigerian. I'm sort of first generation, and, my dad was a veterinary doctor. My mom was a nurse. I always had a bit of a scientific leaning, and, I wanted to help people. My mother had cancer when I was young, and that sort of sparked something in me to help people. And initially, I actually wanted to be a Doctors Without Borders, so go figure, I'm an orthopedic surgeon. But the ride in medical school, I just remember being in the anatomy lab and just being so comfortable in there and strangely comfortable around, cadavers and things like that. decided I want to be a surgeon. And at that point, it was personalities. I really enjoyed working with the orthopedic surgeons and the focus on improvement in quality of life, focusing on, research and things of that nature. The lifestyle wasn't terrible, I have to admit. And I wanted to be a spine surgeon. I think one commonality trait that I've had throughout my career is this zeal to want to have an impact or want to do something that's different. At that point, I want to be a spine surgeon so I could help with spinal injuries. Found a few mentors who were shoulder surgeons, really enjoy shoulder surgery because it combines research and great surgical options and breadth of surgeries and never look back.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's funny, as you get to know surgeons, there's like archetypes, personality traits and things that seem to be pretty pervasive throughout the specialties. And I will say this, like, I could totally see you being a spine surgeon also, because I love, shout out Dr. Ammerman, one of my favorite people in the world, also amazing spine surgeon. But I love the ortho guys too, of course, and ortho spine, two peas in a pod there. So most physicians, I would say, stay in their lane a bit and they just practice medicine and, some entrepreneurial endeavors maybe here or there, but like you didn't, right? You wanted to, try your hand at innovation and been doing that very well, I would say. So was there a specific moment in the OR that first made you think, hey, this rotator cuff repair, tendon repair, this process needs fixing, I can do better? Was it a specific moment? Did it happen over time? I'm curious.
It happened over time, but, I think the origin of SutureTech did start in the OR. I always wanted to do something in the business space. I always felt that I had a bit of a creative energy and I didn't know how to channel it. And I always had ideas. I'm an ideas person. And then over time, but I started thinking about this stuff when I was in residency, just sort of what's a good idea, what is a valuable idea, what is feasible. And it was always part of my plan to, if I was lucky enough, at some point try to do something that has a broader impact. But very early in my career, I was doing, complex rotator cuff repairs. I was practicing in California. And, I felt like I was a great surgeon. That's what mentors do. They tell you you're great. And I came out and like most young surgeons, you start struggling. And I wasn't happy struggling. And at that point, I started thinking to myself, there's got to be a better way to do this, because from a first principle standpoint, I just felt that fixing a tendon to a bone just should not be that hard. And I worked my way back from that belief. I didn't anticipate the ride. I didn't anticipate how long it would take, etc. But that was the start of it. Just a feeling of there's got to be a better way. And I'd like to improve the experience for myself and other surgeons. And then it morphed into something else.
Yeah, I think just a lesson for everyone to take that's listening out of this is that you didn't start with like, oh, I have this product idea, I just want to make a reality. It was like an obsession over the problem. You know what I mean? And you really have to obsess over the problem to build a viable solution. And I feel like a lot of people, I'm sure you had ideas. Idea one, oh, this concept for how to do this. But like when you're focusing on the problem, like it's kind of a natural, I'm thinking like you've got a pan of dirt and you're mining and you're shaking it and you're shaking it. When people just say, oh, here's a nugget, and they pick it out and that first idea they have, they go with it and they toss the rest of the pan. There's bigger gold nuggets in there. You just haven't found them yet. So you really have to kind of go through that process, obsess over the problem and like keep iterating on those concepts. So all of that, of course, led to RapidFix, which is flagship product for SutureTech. I understand it is at the FDA's doorstep currently. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, that's correct. That's correct. We started this, at least I started it about 8-9 years ago, and we're finally submitted to the FDA.
Tell us what makes it unique. Kind of give us the pitch, if you will.
Yeah, well, the RapidFix now submitted to the FDA. It's a novel product. It's basically the world's first all-suture staple. So, when you think about repairing tendons, we think about passing individual suture strands through the tendons and tying it down or what have you. But this offers the most user-friendly, efficient way to repair not just the rotator cuff, but any tendon or ligament in the body in a quick 2-step process. But not only that, it provides significant biomechanical advantages that we think could potentially help with patient healing, just in terms of the amount of tendon contact, the surface area of the repair, the ability to repair it anatomically versus pulling it all to one anchor point. So we try to cover the bases. As you know, you have to sort of think about all the key players. And we thought about the surgeon, the patient, most importantly. We also thought about the healthcare system. Surgeons want something that's easy, effective, efficient. Patients want the best outcomes. And the hospital centers are worried about cost. You minimize cost by maximizing efficiency. So starting with a goal in mind, I just wanted to create something that satisfies the needs of all the key players.
Yeah. That's awesome. I just, again, lessons. If you've got your notebook out and you're taking notes, which you should be, because he's absolutely lacing some gold nuggets here, to use that phrase again, but thinking about all the stakeholders and really understanding what is going to drive value for patients and surgeons, which is the thing everybody thinks about, but then the health system and the economics around it. So like drilling down on that, let me anchor to that point. You hear a lot of people say, oh, we're going to save time in the OR, right? And there's cost in terms of the raw materials. There's cost in SPD. There's cost in procedure time. There's cost in complications. So like making that economic argument, like kind of walk me through how you've thought about that and how you've crafted that economic value proposition for those hospital health system stakeholders.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of data on, drivers of cost for different procedures. And certainly, the rotator cuff tendon repair, the biggest drivers are two. It's one, implant cost, and two, it's time of procedure. And when you think of time of procedure, you're thinking about labor costs per minute, things of that nature. So we wanted to offer something that was priced competitively to other products. We know we have a premium novel product, but we understand the pricing pressures of the market. And we also understand the importance of just traction and getting it in the hands of people. But then not just providing a premium product at a competitive price, but also mapping out the average time it takes to do a repair, how much time you can save using our implants, and extrapolating that into throughput. How many surgeries can a surgeon do in a day? How many surgeries can a center do in a day with this product? And there's also something, this is more subjective, but I think there's something about surgeons being sort of less stressed in a surgical environment and providing a tool that allows the surgeons to get the job done easily, moving on, patients satisfied, surgeons feel happy, the staff feel happy. So looking at it from different points of views.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. With the combo spine product, working on T-lift surgery, basically it's a new, faster way to do that disc prep, bulk denucleation, end plate resurfacing, which is a very manual and tedious process right now. And so it's literally music to my ears because we've been thinking about it a very similar way, right? Like, hey, if we can cut down this very time intensive step by 15 or 20 minutes, what does that do for your throughput? And even if you can't do another 2-level T-lift at the end of the day, room is freed up. You can do another gallbladder, right? In addition to the just per minute you've saved, right? Whatever it is now, I think it's $50 a minute, different, depends on what study you look at. I think it's higher at some places, but like beyond those savings, right? And then the sterile processing stuff, it's like, can you do a gallbladder? Can you do a hysterectomy? Can you do one more procedure that day? And that is huge bucks. That translates to huge dollars. And like, again, I know you do, but for the people listening, like people forget, right? Especially when I think nurse innovators, I didn't realize this when I was starting, and the outpatient procedures broadly, they make the money. They make the money for the hospital. So saving time there is fundamentally different than saving a nurse time at the bedside doing something. So inpatient care, it's like 50, 60% of the expenses, 25% of the revenue, I think. And then those surgical procedures, everything we just talked about, outpatient, surgical, and in the OR, I think it's like 70 or 60% of the revenue, 25% of the cost or something like that. It's right. Crazy. So all that to say, like, innovators should keep in mind, not all time is created equal. There's great studies like you called out, right? Hey, where's the cost in this procedure coming from? What is the labor cost as a share, total build, total revenue extracted from this procedure? So like all of those things are spot on. So I'm curious with this is a 510K, correct?
This is a 510K. That's correct.
So you don't have to do clinical research or get human clinical data to get clearance, but whether it's pre-FDA submission or post-FDA submission, a lot of companies will say, hey, we want to make this economic or clinical value proposition ironclad. Are you guys planning studies? What studies, whether it's economic focused or outcomes focused or 1-year surveillance, or what studies, what clinical evaluations are you guys planning to help make those clinical and economic value propositions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. And I think it's an easy trap for a founder to just say, well, I'm so excited about my product and the whole world is going to feel the same way I feel and just get it out there. But you have to know your area, know your field, and know what the value the stakeholder is looking for. And field of surgery, people want to know that it works. You have your early adopters who want new technology, and then you have that chasm, and then you have the later adopters, and you want to know it works. So we have a number of studies sort of planned, and we think we have something very novel and probably paradigm shifting, because it's novel and its efficiency, but paradigm shifting in how we are repairing the tendons. These tendons, talk about the rotator cuff, it fails. The repairs fail like 30 to 80% of the time. Extremely high morbidity, high cost to reoperate, what have you. So we have to prove our paradigm switch works. We're going to do clinical studies once we get into the market. We already planned for that. collecting outcomes. You're right. 1-year outcomes are the final sort of for the initial study, the final outcome measure of applying to biomechanical studies. If I say, we have the best, whatever it is, contact area, surface area, and the time of repair, we have to prove it out. So we already have applied for a few grants to do some biomechanical studies. And then the research, you always have to think with the end in mind. Okay, we're going to collect data. What kind of questions do we want to answer? We want to answer questions about efficiency, operative time. We want to answer questions about cost. Obviously, we want to answer questions about does it work? And if there are any issues, what kind of issues are we seeing? And then proving it out biomechanically as well. So getting a 510K is one, but we also know that we have to work a bit harder to prove it out, and we will.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. The big lesson there too, it's like you can do studies prior to submitting to the FDA. They will probably have issues with. So like just do them after. You know what I mean? Especially if you feel like you've got like a pretty straightforward class 2 510K. I feel like a lot of people at the FDA, as brilliant as they are, can be deconstructionists in the way that they look at things, and they want to break it down and provide critical feedback. And if you have a study that you've, and this happened to us, we brought them a 40 patient study and they were like, we'd like to see, you missed this endpoint, you missed that endpoint. What? If we would have bought them no study, would they have even asked for another study? You know what I mean? Or one study at all. So like just things to think about. There is risk to doing studies and taking things to the FDA because it gives them more target surface area to shoot at, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, with the FDA, we're submitting what we need to submit, and we're taking advantage of the fact that it's a 510K. And the simple truth is we don't have to do a clinical randomized study or whatever. So we're going to give them what we need to give them, which is a lot of mechanical data testing, biocompatibility, et cetera. But the clinical research would be following the FDA approval.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been through the product development process with a number of things. It can be so challenging, maddening, et cetera. I'm curious, what was your darkest moment in the product development journey and where you thought you might not make it, and kind of how'd you overcome?
That's a great question. For me, just thinking on the spot, it's mentality. I think to be an entrepreneur, you have to have a certain mentality, and you don't have to be born with it. You can develop it over time. I think our first mini prototype was literally made of metal, and we spent a lot of time on this, and I showed a few people and they said, this is crazy. It will never be adopted in the clinical field. And the good news is I took their advice. But the bad news was at that point, it was what we had. And we kind of had to go to the drawing board again to redesign what we needed to do and to make it more user-friendly, which we did. So we had to redesign from the ground up. It didn't take as long as I thought it would. But that was a scary moment because at this point, we only had like one main product that we were pushing. But we went through that, and just a mindset, you can overcome everything.
That's awesome. Yeah. You kind of glossed over it. It's like, yeah, we had to redesign it. It didn't take as long as that's an amazing statement. And I'm curious if we can peel that onion back a little bit more. But I think you're right about kind of the mindset. I feel like it's easy to get overwhelmed, but like having like drive, grit, and determination, if you have those characteristics and live those qualities, and we talked about self-starter, self-motivated, you can just overcome these things, right? I've had to deal with like your primary contract manufacturing group or whatever goes bankrupt, right? Or I was talking to somebody the other day, they were like, hey, I just got ditched by my development group. We were like 3-4 months away from FDA submission, and they got bought by a PE group and they dumped their small clients. And so they're like scrambling to figure it out. We were talking about, using medtechvendors.com to help them find new vendors and whatnot. But you have to have that determination. And I think especially like when you're leading a team, when you're leading an OR, right? Confidence is key, and it is like contagious. You know what I mean? If you've got control of the ship and you're exuding that confidence, not even like, I know exactly what to do right now, but confidence in, we will figure this out, guys. We can do this, right? You got to have it. So to that point about kind of the design pivot, all that stuff, I'm curious, like finding the right manufacturing partners, development partners, or whatever, it can really be make or break. And like, this if you've never gone through it. Yes. How did you find and vet vendors or like partners, kind of what went right, what went wrong, lessons learned?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that to be an entrepreneur, especially if it's your first time taking the major stage and trying to do something significant, you really have to know your strengths and weaknesses, and you have to be humble and honest with yourself. I need help in a lot of facets, but I also knew that I needed to learn a lot about a lot of things. I knew that I couldn't just a surgeon who has an idea and finds So, I was weaving sutures in my garage for like a year and a half straight, just every weekend, just weaving things together, going to suture manufacturers, using my network, my surgical network with companies to vet different manufacturing partners. The team that helped me out the most is it's called Core Medical Ventures. They're in California. And I started working with them initially on the project, and we sort of went our own ways. And I came back to them about 4 years later when we were ready. Sort of independent contractor engineers to work with me on developing the product. We worked together, but it was very milestone dependent. I knew I needed to work with someone for a certain amount of time. When we crossed that milestone, I'd find the next group of partners. Across that milestone, find the next group of partners. But it was all through my network. And also, you have to just know when things aren't working out. We've had some manufacturing companies that we work with initially that it just wasn't a good fit for various reasons. You stay respectful, you get what you can out of the situation, but you have to understand that this is your own time, effort, and you want to spend it on things that are most productive.
Yeah, that's huge. And I love the guys at Core Medical. They're awesome. Their model in general is just super interesting. And I think they do a fantastic job. So I'm not surprised that you had like a great experience with them. So a lot of surgeon founders, there's a balancing act, right? That's like pretty difficult. And honestly, I feel like the surgeon founders that I know, the balance of like, hey, I've got this side gig and then I've got my, then I've got like my surgical practice, right? My work as a physician. I feel like a lot of them like balance that incredibly well. And that's not the issue. It's more on just on the startup side, balancing like investors, those relationships, roles, how involved you are, and then how that pushes out to the rest of the team, if there is a team, like, right? So I'm just curious with the startup, with your time, and then kind of communicating to investors, working with those partners, like what are some tips and tricks for other surgeon inventors, surgeon innovators to balance both time, balance messaging to investors, and balancing your interaction with your teams?
That's a very hard thing to figure out. I think you have to, for me, it was in stages. I think I knew that my surgical career lends itself so nicely to what I'm doing. And I felt like the better a surgeon I was, better of a tool I can create. The more I'm learning about tendon repairs, et cetera, the better I can make an implant. I also knew that investors, especially big investors, they want to have a lead person. I did get a number of people say no because I'm a surgeon and they felt I didn't have enough time.
Yeah.
You have to anticipate what the drawbacks or criticism would be. So you have to surround yourself with talent from an early stage. I was working full time, but I had at least 4 people helping me out in the company, and they had various skills. Some were more customer facing. They can interact with investors on my behalf. Some were more on the engineering side. And then eventually I work part-time clinically and part-time on this company. You have to know when to make that switch if you have to, but you have to be willing to sacrifice. It's just a simple truth is it's hard to do very, very high level challenging things, given 100% at the same time. You have to pull back a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree on that sacrifice point. And I always tell people it's like it will become painfully obvious when you need to like either quit your full time or scale it back to part time or try to do that. Like you should never do it before you feel like you can't stand it any longer, because it is a risk, right? But like I think trying to make that wait and ride it out as long as possible is like always the right move. So I'm curious, when the innovation, every health system has a different modus operandi for how they handle innovations from clinicians and when it was invented and how they handle it with royalties or ownership. And like there's, the Cleveland Clinic model, and then there's some other models where they don't take any of it because they want to just spur innovation, and some overbearing ownership percentage that the facility is going to get be a detriment to people innovating in their facility. So like you could argue back and forth on like which one's right, which one works. Cleveland Clinic and their royalty revenue is a little bit evidence for like one great way to do it. But talk me through, did you deal with that, the disclosures, the timing of it all? Like I'm just curious what your experience with that was.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you have to be transparent, and you have to sort of imagine like what's the worst case scenario and work from that. And, I felt that, being transparent would avoid a lot of issues. I started working on this company before I got to Duke.
In residency, you said, yeah.
Correct, which was helpful. The company was already formalized. I already had, a patent or two, and then got recruited to Duke. And before I even accepted the job, I, let everyone know that this is something I'm working on, just so and that I intended to keep it separate. Duke is a great university, and they're also very friendly to entrepreneurship. And I've been able to keep it separate because I just have not involved Duke with any of the development process. I've done it all on the outside. I use any Duke resources whatsoever for this company. But I would tell surgeons surgeons, because, I do work with a lot of engineering students and other surgeons who are interested in entrepreneurship. It's not a bad idea to partner with a large institution if they're friendly. I would say if you have the opportunity to have two routes, you can work with a large institution or you can work by yourself. I think the product and the problem that you're trying to solve should determine which route to go. If you think this is something that's going to require an inordinate amount of resources and just a massive undertaking, you're trying to solve a cancer problem, you're coming up with a vaccine or something like those are problems where you probably should partner with a large academic institution as a rule. But if you're doing something that's a bit more on a smaller scale, something that's more practical and you can do it, I think it's not a bad idea if you're allowed to try to pursue that separately. So it just depends on the problem you're trying to solve.
Totally agree. And I think the way you did it's really interesting. Like there was probably a point where one locks you in. Like if you innovate at their facility, a lot of the times you're kind of locked into doing it with them and their ownership. But if you create your entity and file your patent prior to accepting that job, I want to say there's probably an avenue to then re-engage them to say, hey, do you want a piece of this? And we can kind of collaborate on this. But you at least have that option to do it or not, because they can't force you if you've already done it. So I think maybe a lesson to any of I know we've got some med school, residents and different people where they're going to land eventually. If you have an idea that you are serious about, it may be worth just go ahead and filing that LLC, right? And maybe you don't even have to do that. Just file that patent application, get a provisional down. That way, when you get hired, you can say, hey, I've already have this patent application disclosed. That way it would make it, a couple $100, right? But that way it gives you a solid footing so you don't have to say, well, I've actually got emails and sketches from back then before I joined and you're dealing with that whole thing. So just maybe a word there. So we're talking about partners, we're talking about finding vendors, etc. I want to do a quick test. So this is, let me zoom in here. So this is medtechvendors.com. So let's see and just run a test with your device. So I need a design and development group that can help design and develop my rotator cuff repair device for orthopedic shoulder repair. Okay, let's see. And I don't know if you've used this yet, but I'm curious what your thoughts are after kind of gone through the whole process. Now you're at FDA submission. Let's see what it comes up with, right? Okay, so we've got Remedy Medical, Medical Murray, and then Core Medical. Look at that. So it's given you a 96% match on them. So that would have worked well, right? And I don't know how long it took you to find Core Medical. Maybe it was 15 seconds. Maybe it was longer.
It was hard, honestly, finding the right partners. It's so hard because your first time around, you don't know what's out there. You have limited resources. You're so worried about spending it at the wrong company. Some of the names I saw there I actually talked to as well. Medical Murray is a great company, but this is very helpful. I mean, and it's also accurate because what you're showing is exactly, those are exactly the companies I was talking to.
Yeah.
It's very helpful. And I think, it's always about, do you trust what you see? But my experience, I think that's a great tool.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, cool. I'd be remiss if I didn't kind of plug that at least a little bit while we're on the pod. So I want to talk about, pitching investors. And I think you guys are raising money. You don't have to confirm or deny that. I'm pretty sure that's the case. Don't want to make you publicly solicit or anything, but just when you've been pitching investors for SutureTech, right? Are there any messages or value props that you have found to resonate the most with investors, right? I know we talked about what resonates with health systems and hospitals. Maybe it's the same thing, maybe it's different, right? But what are you seeing kind of in today's market with today's investors? What are you seeing resonate with them?
Yeah, well, I don't think you just have one pitch for everyone. I don't think you should have one deck for everyone. I think you should have different pitches for specific groups and decks that are different to specific groups. Yep. For investors, that makes sense, but they're more interested in the market size, the market capture, what your true competitive benefits are, looking at your team, how strong is your team, what have you done? So with formal investors, and those are who we're approaching now, and the feedback has been great. It's more focused on the opportunity, the revenue targets, how we separate ourselves from other competitors in the market, and our sort of unique advantages. Versus with surgeons and others, it's a bit more scientific. Yeah, well, hospital systems and, talking with them, it's just more about cost, throughput, how easy it is to package, number of SKUs necessary, things of that nature. So you have to sort of know the pain points for the different groups you're talking to and approach them very differently.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I know I keep like calling back on like lessons learned just because there's so many you're spitting here, but like that, like different deck for different people is so huge. I mean, like I always say, like you should almost like evolve out of like, oh, this is our deck. It's like, well, which deck do you need, right? Do you need the 10-minute, the 15-minute teaser deck, confidential deck, scientific investor deck, finance guy, investor, finance bro, investor deck, you know what I mean? But I've also seen too, like, I feel like one of the reasons I think medtech has been in a slump, just focusing on the medtech sector, not kind of the external forces of like AI proliferating and all this other stuff, right? Yeah. Market, the kind of macro stuff, just looking at the medtech market. I feel like there were a lot of companies that had really exciting tech, good IP, really promising outcomes and different things like that in the 2000 teens and years past that failed to really materialize or live up to their expectations, largely because of the commercialization and sales and distribution and adoption, right? And so I feel like with the investor inquiries and things like that, it's been a lot more focused, talking about raising money with Combo Spine, a lot more focused on what's your sales and distribution and commercialization and reimbursement and unit economics and margins, like go down the list, right? And even like a focus too on like, not just like, what is your plan for this, but like, who do you have in place that's done this before? Who do you have in place that has done this successfully and that can do this again and has those relationships? And like in the ortho world, like the distributor relationships you have are huge, right? And as a surgeon, I'm sure you have your distributors that you love and like you trust them when they say, hey, you should try this, right? So I've seen a huge focus on that. I'm not sure if you're seeing that as well.
No doubt. I mean, I'd summarize it saying for sure, operations is the key with these investors. What's your price placement? What's your distribution? What's your sales channel? How do you manage, non-competes when you're trying to find a salesperson? What's your regional target? How are you going to acquire users? How are you going to market the product? You have a pro forma. Can you prove your pro forma? Is it defendable? What's the EBITDA margin? Is it in line? So these are things that you just have to start working on early. And if you're a surgeon, you have to know what you don't know. And these business operational parts of your company, you have to start learning quickly. And we've been doing that for a long time, just getting these answers. And then we have investors we have a very big distributor who's an investor. You want to get some of these people on your team, formally or informally, so that you now have channels that you can work through. We have investor channels. We have some salespeople, part of the company, but you want to try to fill in as many of these holes as you can early on.
That's huge. I think like those, I'll call them like kind of non-traditional capital partners, whether it's contract manufacturers, if you can, whether it's, maybe in-kind equity, if they'll do that, as well as distributors. Those are like great early partners to have, and if they can invest money, great. But there are even avenues where it's like they don't invest any direct capital, but they still get equity because it's such a value add, right, for you in the long run. Obviously, like there's a moment where every founder has to decide whether they're going to bootstrap or raise capital. Pretty much in medtech, it's like, you're going to have to raise capital. It's just kind of a matter of when. When you're thinking about your funding strategy and your capital strategy, how did you learn that? How did you scope that out, devise that plan for the capital strategy, this round, the next round? People peer into your thought process for capital strategy here.
Yeah, well, initially it's a slow burn. I was already thinking about dilution and these things from the start, already reading about when you invest, when to approach a VC, when to approach an angel, when to go with a bootstrapping approach. When I knew I had something, when I was sure I had something, I took the next step, which was personally investing a lot. And everyone has a different sort of ability to do that. But I did put a lot of my own sort of funds initially. And the thinking was, the farther along the product is, if you're thinking about milestones, you're trying to reach the important milestones that require the least amount of spend. So for an example, maybe a milestone is getting one patent submitted. That's maybe a reasonable spend. Another milestone could be obviously incorporating and doing things the right way, building an entity. Another milestone could be just simply finding the right partners. Another milestone could be some of your testing, your design free. So I did a lot of investing myself, but then I started inviting people to invest, and we've sort of done it in tranches. You can either try to raise a lot of money right away, or you can have a milestone-based model, which I like. So based on very significant milestones, I will then sort of reopen the investment pool. Two things I'm trying to avoid a down round. I want to under-promise and over-deliver. I don't want to blow up my valuation. I want to keep it competitive, but I would like to limit the number of people investing or the amount invested until I need it. So I open it up as I need it. I think about my dilution. I have a milestone approach, thinking about it. You got to be humble yourself and price accordingly so you can avoid a down round.
100%. Competitive valuation is really key, especially when the sector is not having its best moment. You know what I mean? And I think too, you hit on this earlier and I didn't really remark on it, but like having a competitive price point and not coming to be like, yeah, we're going to charge 35% more than the other stuff that they're using right now. That is so key. And people think, oh, well, it's new, they'll pay more. It's like, maybe they used to. They're not doing that right now. You know what I mean? The ownership class, the revenue, and from a hospital perspective, the ownership classes are changing. There's consolidation, there's squeezing of budgets. And so I think it's just like very smart that you guys have been thinking about it this way. And to that point about the capital strategy, this is just sharing a little snippet from the EXO playbook here, but this is kind of a graphic we put together to talk through those milestones, exactly what you were talking about. All right, what are these milestones? You know, you lay all those out, working left to right. Then you say, okay, well, how much capital will it take? What's a reasonable round to get those done, right? In those chunks and the valuations that I think I can be at, right? What valuation can I fetch at these different milestones? So I think thinking about it that way, you got to, right? There's also, it's before you've even put in your own money, I think you got to do this exercise because you can almost get to a point where it's like, if you put in too little of your own money, you're not going to get far enough, right? But if you put in too much of your own money, then you're kind of like hanging on this like, well, the next big inflection point is this far away, but like I can't get there on my own money. But like, so you really do, even when it's your own money too, right? You have to be strategic about that and that capital strategy. So last question I'll have here for you. So if you could go back and give advice to the version of yourself that was just starting SutureTech, what advice would you give a young doc, young surgeon starting SutureTech?
Finding the right partners early is key. Looking for partnership early is key. Perhaps I kept everything so close to chest. I was so afraid of someone, quote unquote, stealing my idea. You have to be. When you operate that way, you can really slow your cycle of innovation. You're not getting the right people as soon as you can because you're so focused on someone sort of stealing your idea. So I think if there's one, there are many, but if there was one big piece of advice I'd give myself, the younger version of me would be to start looking for partnerships earlier. You know, I was very siloed from the start. I mean, just doing it in my little partnerships earlier will help for a quicker cycle of innovation.
Yeah, that's so huge. I mean, I beat this drum every chance I get, and I still haven't identified kind of the sole source of why people are so close to the chest in medtech, but it's so pervasive and it's like, it's just such a paradox, or like the juxtaposition of, you see these tech people where the cost to replicate, right, and the ability to steal someone's idea is like basically nothing these days. And all of those people are building out in the open, sharing their designs, showing how they're working on things. And then on the flip side, you have medtech where it's incredibly difficult to replicate. There's IP they would have to get around. The cost for them to try to steal it is so high, and the risk of doing that with the IP, and people are more close to the vest and they think, oh, they're going to steal my idea. I can't talk to this advisor, or, you know, I'm going to ask for someone's mentor time and then try to get them to sign an NDA or tell, oh, I can't really share that. It's crazy, but it's like, it exists. But that's great point, great insight.
I think, you know, we got to help early. It's just get people to help out early versus doing everything yourself. The other thing.
For sure. So wrapping things up here, anything to plug? We're going to put, you know, your LinkedIn, SutureTech, website link, all that stuff in the show notes for the episode so people can check out what you're working on, reach out if they have questions or interested in SutureTech, that kind of thing. Any closing thoughts, closing things that you want to plug? You know, kind of floor is yours here.
Yeah, well, I think I'd say to anyone out there, the journey is not done with SutureTech. We have a lot of things to do. We've accomplished a lot. For anyone out there who's thinking about it, I just want to say, you know, you can definitely do it. Think about your idea. Just don't put any idea, and find mentors. You know, I found so many people early who gave me so much advice in the business industry, you know, CEOs of larger, smaller companies, just asking a lot of questions, pairing yourself with the right people. On the SutureTech side, we're excited about what we have. It's not just a shoulder product. I think a lot of people think it's a rotator cuff product. The submission to the FDA is for soft tissue repair. So this is going to work in the ankle, the knee, the shoulder, the elbow, what have you. We have a great team of surgeons partnering with us. There's great interest out there. So I think the next 12 months is going to be very exciting. And I have a strong feeling that we're going to impact how we think about tendon repairs permanently, which ultimately is one of my bigger goals, is just to try to move the industry. It's a millimeter that's worth it, because I'm on the back of thousands and millions of innovators who have been pushing the envelope. So it's just time for SutureTech to put its hat in the ring.
Well said. You heard it here. Thanks for everybody that tuned in. That was a great closing. Dr. Oke Anakwenze, Can't thank you enough. It was so awesome to meet you. Like, I had heard nothing but amazing things about you, and you lived up to the hype and then some. And I know the audience like took a ton away from this. I did as well. So thank you again, everybody that tuned in to this episode of the Medtech Innovation Podcast. Thank you for staying on this long. But okay, hope you have the great rest of your week. Okay.
Thank you, Spencer. This was awesome.
Awesome. All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you.